Good to go, Cantor. Shabbat shalom. Cantor, we can't hear you. Cantor, Rabbi, we can't hear you yet. Cantor, Rabbi, Shai, we cannot hear you. Little technical difficulty, friends. We cannot hear the cantor, the rabbi, or the pianist. Hang tight. They may be on mute. I'm trying to tell them. Cantor, rabbi. We can't hear you. Cantor, rabbi, mayor. We cannot hear you. No sound. We are aware there's a sound issue. Hold on, everybody. Apologize for the delay. We cannot hear you. Cantor, rabbi. We cannot hear you. No sound. There is no sound right now. Okay, give him a minute. You got it.
Messages. We hear you. Hine ma tovu ma naim sheverachim gam yachad.
Better?
Hine ma
Not better?
tovu ma naim sheverachim gam yachad. Hine ma tovu ma naim sheverachim gam yachad. Sheverachim gam yachad. Hinei ma tovu manayim. 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 Sheverachim gam yachad.
Shabbat shalom all. Yes, Hinei Matov Manayim. How wonderful it is to sit together, even in our separate Zoomed worlds. We are together. It's wonderful to be together. Thank you so many times over to Brotherhood on so many fronts. You've made this Shabbat happen, and it's going to be a wonderful morning, and we're grateful to you and as well to Sisterhood. The fact that you all come together to plan this and help promote it is really precious and wonderful, and we're grateful. So we're grateful for so much. Today is a day of so much gratitude. And on page 67, dear Alan Lowenkron, who has made such an unbelievable impact, difference, small and massive, in the lives of so many families here in Great Neck. So many weeks in a row, months in a row over this year of COVID and before. Alan, thank you from the bottom of my heart, of our hearts. We're all standing taller because of you, even if it's sort of a spiritual height for some of us. Page 67, say anything you want, Alan.
Well, I'll just say thank you, Mayor. Much appreciated, and Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I enter this sacred space to voice the longings of my heart in prayer, in sacred company. I offer my love to the Holy One. I devote myself this morning to psalm and song, study and prayer. May my heart be lifted, may my thoughts be deepened, and may my soul, like the eagle, soar.
Beautiful. Your soul helps us soar, Alan. We turn to page 74 with Cantor Adam leading us in Matovu.
משכנותיך ישראל, מה טובו, מה טובו, אוהליך יעקב, משכנותיך ישראל, ואני ברוב חסדך אבוא ביתך, אשתחווה אל היכל קודשך ביראתך. David Sutton, unmute. Can you unmute?
Ma tovu, ma tovu, ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael, ma tovu, ma tovu. Ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael.
Adonai ahavti mehon betecha, mekom mishkan kevodecha, mishkan kvodecha, va'ani אשתחווה ואפרע אברכה לפני אדוני עושי.
מה טובו, מה טובו, אוהליך יעקב, משכנותיך ישראל, מה טובו, מה טובו, אוהליך יעקב, משכנותיך ישראל.
ואני תפילתי לך, אדוני את רצון, אלוהים ברוב חסדך, אלוהים ברוב חסדך, ענני באמת אישך.
מה טובו, מה טובו, Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael, Matovu, Matovu, Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael.
משכנותיך ישראל.
Beautifully done, David and Cantor. You guys should take that on the road. And Pete, although you have a reading on page 75, which is very special, I just want it to be said that there's not a lack of musical talent in your soul and body as well. So next time we'll have to hear some of your musical gift as well. I think for this morning you're going to offer a reading on 75, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mayor. I've got COVID here and I just don't have the reading in front of me. Is it posted?
Okay.
If not, someone else can do it. I'm sorry.
No worries, no stress. It's okay. It's okay. I'll offer it. I don't know. You're inspiring me even though you don't have the words, Pete. So don't. It's true. May the one whose spirit is with us in every righteous deed be with all who work for the good of humanity and bear the burdens of others and give bread to the hungry and clothe the naked and take the friendless into their homes. May the work of their hands endure, and may the seed they sow bring abundant harvest. And let us say amen. And thank you, Pete. Matt, motion 77, Don't Let Me Fall. You have a lot of musical ability as well. Go on.
Don't let me fall as a stone falls upon the hard ground, and don't let my hands become dry as the twigs of a tree. When the wind beats down the last leaves, and when the storm raises dust from the earth with anger and howling, don't let me fall. I have asked for so much, but as a blade of your grass in a distant wild field, let's drop a seed in the lap of your earth and dies away. Sow in me your living breath as you sow a seed in the earth. Baruch atah Adonai, rofei chol basar, umafili la'asot.
Amen. For the functioning of our bodies. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for so much making this Shabbat happen, Thursday night happen. Dear God, our soul is pure. Cantor Adam leads us in Elohai Neshama 78.
Elohai, Elohai, Neshama, Neshama, Shenatata bi, Shenatata bi, Tehorahi, Tehorahi. Elohai, Elohai, Neshama, Neshama, Shenatata bi, Shenatata bi, Tehorahi, Tehorahi. Baruch atah Adonai, asher beyado nefesh mol chai veruach kol basari.
We turn to page 80 for the miracles of every day, daily miracles. Nisim b'chol yom on 80. We know this Very well. Every morning we wake up like, whoa, I'm here again. Ha, maybe there's a task, a mission, a holy something for me to do today. Cantor Adam.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lesech vivina lehekvim ben yom uven laila. He's given the man the ability to distinguish day from night.
Amen. And Dan, is this you?
Yes. Shabbat Shalom. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who opens the eyes of the blind.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim, who
Amen.
frees the captive.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who lifts up the fallen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, roka haaretz ha'lamayim, who stretches the earth over the waters.
Baruch. Dan, I think you're up, right?
Oh, that was the
Oh.
the cantor next.
Oh, go on.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamechim mitzahadei gaver, who strengthens our steps.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who clothes the naked.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hanoten le'ahev koach, who gives strength to the weary.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. The bottom of 82. Remove sleep from the eyes and slumber from the eyelids.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who made me in the image of God.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me free.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani Yisrael, who has made me anew.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who girds Israel with strength.
Amen. The bottom. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who crowns Israel with splendor.
Amen. Baruch atah
Atah
Adonai
Adonai
Eloheinu melech haolam, asher ketshanu
follows us
b'mitzvotav,
mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words
la'asot divrei
of Torah. And now words of Torah from Len Shechem 86. Oh Adonai.
What are we saying?
We're looking for Len Ship. There he is.
I'm sorry, I'm lost. Cantor.
It's bottom of 86.
And Len's.
What is he reading?
Oh Lord. Oh Adonai.
I'm reading that?
Go ahead.
Oh, Adonai our God, let the words of Torah be sweet in our mouths and in the mouths of your people Israel, so that we, our descendants, and the descendants of all your people Israel may know you, by studying your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to your people Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, hamlamed Torah la'amo Yisrael.
Amen. Amen. And 88, Mike Elman, if you could offer us the middle of the page. These are things.
These are things that are limitless, of which a person enjoys the fruit of the world, while the principle remains in the world to come. They are honoring one's father and mother, engaging in deeds of compassion, arriving early for study, morning and evening, dealing graciously with guests, visiting the sick, providing for the wedding couple, accompanying the dead for burial, being devoted in prayer, and making peace among people. But the study of Torah encompasses them all.
Amen. Thank you, Michael. On page 94, Cantor Adam. Baruch Shamar.
Baruch Shemar v'haya ha'olam, Baruch hu, Baruch Hoseh v'reishit, Baruch hu mevi Yoseh, Baruch hu zerum chayim, Baruch hu mekem al haaretz, Baruch merachem al habriyot, Baruch meshalem sachar tov l'reyav, ברוך העל וקיים לנצח, ברוך הוא ומציל, ברוך שמו. בשבחות ובזמרות נגד לך ונשבחך ונפרעך ונזכיר שמך ונמליכך. מלכנו אלוהינו יחיד חי העולמים, מלך משובח ומפאר, עדי עד שמו הגדול, ברוך אתה אדוני, מלך מחולל בתשבחות.
Amen. We turn to 97 as we offer Ashrei, an acrostic that takes us through all the magic and the blessings of life, A to Z, except the one mystical blessing that we have to figure out on our own, which is none. But anyway, we're on page 97. Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha Od Yalucha Selah.
אשרי העם שככה לו, אשרי העם שאדוני אלוהיו.
Tehillah LaDavid, Armimcha Eloi HaMelech, V'abarcha Shimcha Le'olam Va'ed.
בכל יום אברכך ואהללה שמך לעולם ועד.
Gadol Adonai Mo'al Me'od, V'ligdulato Ein Cheker.
דור לדור ישבח מעשיך וגבורתך יגידו.
Hadar Kevododecha, V'divrei Niflotecha Asicha.
וזוז נרותיך יאמרו, גדולתך אספרנה.
Zecher Avtucha Yabiu, V'tzidkotecha Yiranenu.
חנון ורחום אדוני, ערך אפיים מוגדל חסד.
Tov. Why did I lengthen that word? Tov Adonai lakol, v'rachamav al kol ma'asav.
יודוך אדוני כל מעשיך, וחסידיך יברכוך.
98 at the top. Kevod malchutecha yomeru, gvuratecha yidaberu.
להודיע לבני האדם גבורותיו, וכבוד באדר מלכותו.
Malchutcha, malchut kol olamim, umemshaltecha bechol dor vador. Malchutcha, malchut kol olamim, umemshaltecha bechol dor vador. Somech.
סומך אדוני לכל הנופלים, וזוקף לכל הכפופים.
Einei chol elech yesaberu, v'yata noten lehem et ochlam bito.
פותח את ידיך ומשביח לכל חי רצון. פותח את ידיך ומשביע לכל חי רצון.
Tzadik Adonai b'chol derachav, v'chasid b'chol ma'asav.
קרוב אדוני לכל קוראיו, לכל אשר יקראוך באמת.
V'tzon yireav yaseh, v'yet shavatam yishma v'yoshiem.
שומר אדוני את כל האוהבה, ואת כל השעים ישמיד.
Tehillat Adonai yedaber piv, v'yorech kol basar, shem kodsho le'olam va'ed. V'anachnu nevarech ya, me'ata v'yad olam. Hallelujah. Page 100, Cantor Adam and then Jen.
Hallelujah. 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 And now the words at the bottom of the prayer. Kol hanshama tehallelya. Kol hanshama tehallelya. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Kol hanshama tehallelya. Hallelujah. 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 El bekodsho. Hallelujah. Birkiya uzo. Hallelujah. Bigvorota. Hallelujah. Kerobo lojen.
Hallelujah, hallelujah.
Kol hanshama tehallelya. Hallelujah. 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 Beteka shofar. Hallelujah. Berevel bechinor. Hallelujah. Betoch machor.
Hanshama te hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol hanshama te hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
Hallelu betzitzele shama. Isa tzitzele. Hallelu betzitzele trua. Kol hanshama te hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol hanshama te hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Shifts.
Te hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
Kol hanshama te hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol hanshama te hallelujah. Finish this up.
Hallelujah, hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Cantor Adam, Nishmat Kochai. 101.
נשמת כל חי, תברך את שמך, אדוני אלוהינו. נשמת כל חי, תברך את שמך, אדוני אלוהינו. אלי, 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 all things that live to God praise must give. Adonai Elohim. Nishmat kol chai tevarech et shimcha. Adonai Eloheinu. Lai, 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 la, 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 lai, 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 la, lai, 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 la, lai, 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 la, 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 lai, 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 la, lai, 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 We continue at the top of page 104. האל בעצמו דוזך, הגדול בכבוד שמך, הגיבור לנצח והנורא בנורתך, המלך היושב על כיסא רם ונישא, שוכן עד מרום וקדוש שמו וכתוב רעננו צדיקים באדוני לישרים נאווה תהילה בפי שרים תתהלל ודברי צדיקים תתברך ובלשון חסידים תתרומם ובקרב קדושים תתברך קדושים תתקדש ובמקהלות רביבות עמך בית ישראל ברינה יתפאר שמך מכנו בכל דור ודור ישתבח שמך ליד מלכנו האל המלך הגדול והקדוש בשמיים ובארץ כי לך נאה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו שיר ושבחה הלל וזמרה עוז וממשלה נצח גדולה וגבורה תהילה ותפארת, קדושה ומלכות, ברכות והוראות מעתה ועד עולם. ברוך אתה אדוני, אל מלך גדול בתשבחות, אל ההודעות אדון הנפלאות, הבוחר בשירי וזמרה, מלך אלכי העולמים.
106, Chatzi Kaddish.
יקדל ויקדש שמי רבה,
אמן.
ואלמד יברך חירותי, וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומייכון ובחיי לכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב אמרו,
אמן.
אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם עולמי עלמיה. יפרח וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה, שמי לקודשה בריחו, לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, תאמירן בעלמה ואמרו,
Amen. Feel free to rise for the Baruch Hu if you would like. Page 108.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Vaed. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam We're on page 110. We welcome the sun and its rays and its light, and the presence of Adonai in our world, as each day renews it once more. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, yotzer or uvorei choshech, oseh shalom uvorei et hakol. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, yotzer or uvorei choshech, oseh shalom uvorei et hakol. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, creator of light and darkness, who makes peace and fashions all things. In mercy you illuminate the world and those who live upon it. In your goodness you daily renew creation. How numerous are your works, Adonai. Ma rabu ma'asecha. In wisdom you formed them all. Bechokhma she'asita yevarucha selah. And for the lights you created, may they glorify you. Shine a new light on Zion, that we all may swiftly merit its radiance. Or chadash al Zion ta'ir, v'nizkeh kulanu meira leoro. Baruch atah Adonai, yotzer ha'meorot. We continue on page 112. Ahava Rabbah Tamu Adonai Eloheinu Ela Gedola V'Tera לשמוע, ללמוד וללמד, לשמוע ולעשות ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד אתה אדוני הבוחר בימו ישראל באהבה.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem, Kivod Malchuto, Leolam Vaed. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, V'chol levavecha uv'chol nafshecha uv'chol meodecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta ba'am b'shivtecha b'veitecha uv'lechtecha v'aderech Uv'shachtecha uv'kumecha, u'kshartam le'ot al yadecha, v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha, u'ktavtam al mezuzot beitecha, u'visharecha. L'man tizkeru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai, v'hitem kedoshim le'Elohechem. Ani Adonai Elohechem, Asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim, lehiot lachem le'Elohim. Ani Adonai Elohechem.
Thank you, Howard. So before we go to Micha Mocha and then the Amidah, just a very quick thought. After we get to the Amidah, we say this line, Mechakel Chayim Bechesed, Mechaye Akol. You sustain life. It's about God, how great God is. It starts with Tagibor, you are great God. And the question of the prayer is, who's great? Or how do we understand greatness as Jews? And it says, you sustain God life through love. giving life to all. Through how? Great compassion. How? Supporting the fallen. How? Healing the sick. How? Freeing the captive. How? Keeping faith with those who are sleeping in the dust. God's doing all that. Of course it's God. Yes, it's God. But God is telling us, reminding us, God can't do it without our help, without our massive partnership, which is what all of you here today are so much about. I mean, just so profound, so beautiful. Tara and I have said it 1,000 times in the last 12 years, like how incredible our brotherhood and our sisterhood is. Our lay folks are, because you all do these things, sustain life through love, through great compassion, support the fallen, healing the sick, freeing the captive. Yes, it's describing God, but it is also describing you, us.
Rabbi, if I could turn everyone's attention to page 117 as you're speaking, these words on the prayer book are saying exactly what you're saying. So please continue. I just want to direct everyone's attention to that.
Great. I'm good. I'm good. What should lead us? Tell us what's next, Cantor.
Well, we should follow that path that you're walking, because what the rabbi is essentially saying is we don't just talk the talk, we walk the walk.
Nice.
And we don't just read Torah, we live Torah, and we bring it to life off of the cloth, off the page, and bring it to our feet. It's about our actions. And so let's continue on that march forward into the future with the words of Mi Chamocha on page 118. Sorry, 122. Lie, 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 Yehuda veYisrael, Gohu aleinu Adonai Tzevaot Shemo, Kedosh Yisrael, Baruch Ata Adonai, Gaal Yisrael.
If you'd like to rise for the Amidah, please do.
124. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei Avoteinu ve'imoteinu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah. וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם בעזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע, משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, צומח נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו בשני עפר. מי כמוך על גבורות ומדום אליו, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי הכל. We're on page 130. נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה אל זה ואמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות, אלוה כל הארץ כבודו. אדיר אדירנו אדוני אדוננו, אדיר שמך בכל הארץ, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אחד הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו ומלכנו, הוא מושיענו והוא ישפיענו, ברחמיו לעיני כל חי. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהי ציון לדור ודור. הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש. ושבחך אלוהינו מהפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
And before we take a moment for our silence, quiet meditation, before that, just if we can ask Gary Greenfield, Gary, on 133, these two short passages about memory and about the sacred word, the sacred sound of life. Thank you, Gary.
We are a people in whom the past endures, in whom the present is inconceivable without moments gone by. The Exodus lasted a moment enduring forever. What happened once upon a time happens all the time. A thought has blown the marketplace away. There is a song on the wind and joy in the trees. Shabbat arrives in the world, scattering a song in the silence of the night. Eternity utters a day.
Gary, thank you so much. Thank you. So let's all take a moment of quiet, of remembering, of hoping, of praying, of possibilities. A moment of quiet. and 132. Yismechu, Cantor Adam.
ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת מקדשי שביעי שבת כולם ישבעו ויתענגו בטובך שבת ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת והשביעי רצית בו וקידשתו שבת חמדת ימים אותו קראת שבת ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת זכר למעשה בראשית שבת זכר למעשה בראשית שבת ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת
134.
אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואמותינו רצה במנוחתנו קדשנו במצוותיך ותן חלקנו בתורתך סבנו מטובך ושמחנו בישועתך ותאר ליבנו ותאר ליבנו ותאר ליבנו לעובדך באמת ותאר ליבנו ותאר ליבנו ותאר ליבנו לעובדך באמת והנחיל רצון ברצון שבת קודשך וינוחו בישראל מקדשי שמך ברוך אתה אדוני המקדש השבת.
Page 136.
רצה אדוני אלוהינו בימך ישראל ותפילתם באהבה תקבל ותהי לרצון תמיד עבודת ישראל ישראל עמך אל קרוב לכל קורב בני אל עבדיך וחוננו שפוך רוחך עלינו ותחזינה עינינו בשובך לציון. ברחמים ברוך אתה אדוני המחזיר שכינתו לציון.
God's innermost, most palpable presence, the Shekhinah, on page 136, we turn to prayer for peace. Sim Shalom, 142. 140.
Sim Shalom, page 140. Sim Shalom, Tova uvracha, Hein v'chesed v'rachamim v'rachamim aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol Yisrael amecha, barcheinu yotzreinu kulanu kechad, v'or panecha, ki v'or panecha נתת לנו, אדוני אלוהינו. שים שלום, שים שלום, טובה וברכה, אין וחסד, ורחמים ורחמים עלינו, ועל כל ישראל, ועל כל ישראל עמך, תורת חיים ואהבת חסד, ואהבת חסד, וצדקה וברכה, ורחמים וחיים ושלום. שים שלום, שים שלום, טובה וברכה, אין וחסד ורחמים ורחמים עלינו, ועל כל ישראל, ועל כל ישראל עמך, וטוב וטוב בעיניך לברך את עמך ישראל בכל עת ובכל שעה בשלומך, בשלומך. שים שלום, טובה וברכה, אין וחסד ורחמים ורחמים עלינו, ועל כל ישראל, ועל כל ישראל עמך. ברוך אתה אדוני המברך את עמו ישראל בשלום.
And now we turn to Oseh Shalom, I believe. Oseh Shalom.
We can do Oseh Shalom. Let's do Oseh Shalom. Page 142. Oseh Shalom bimromam, Oyaseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael.
service. We arrive at our Torah service. I'm going to actually move the computer so it's very close to the ark. The suspense is pretty intense, right? What's going on? Don't get dizzy.
Ein kemocha va'elohim Adonai ve'ein kema'asecha malachutecha malachut kol olamim u'memshaltecha bechol dor v'dor Adonai melech Adonai malach Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed Adonai oz le'amo yitein Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom av harachamim eitiva virtzovonecha etzion tivnei chamot Yerushalayim tivnei chamot Yerushalayim ki bcha levad batachnu melech el ram benisha Adon olamim. The rabbi is holding in his hands the special ancient Sephardic Torah of Temple Beth-El of Great Neck. This 500 to 600-year-old scroll from North Africa is a treasure that we are celebrating this year. It is a very precious and special Torah that you will see up close and personal. We are using it in worship for the first time, perhaps the first time in many, many, many decades. So this Torah is very amazing, and you can see just by the size of it, compared to the other Torahs in our ark. If the rabbi will put it back in the ark for just 1 second, you can see just how small it is, how dainty, and compared to the other Torahs. And you can also see the size of the eitzim. The handles of the other Torahs are rather short, and these on the top are rather long, telling us that, yes, indeed, perhaps at one point this Sephardic Torah was inside a portable ark called a teak, a Sephardic portable ark for Torahs. And so this is a very special thing we're doing today that you will see up close and personal, and will be connected, of course, to the theme of our speaker about the crown of Aleppo and the very special ancient text that was celebrated in that book. So we'll continue on page 246. Before we do it, we'll do that. Before we chant. Good idea. So we're on page 246. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, ki mitzion tetzei Torah, udevar Adonai v'Yerushalayim. Page 248. Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah, Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah, le'amo Yisrael v'kedushato. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Echad Eloheinu Gadol Adonenu Kadosh Shemo Gadol Adonai Iti ונרוממה שמו יחדיו. לך אדוני הגדולה והגבורה והתפארת והכבוד, כי כל בשמיים ובארץ, כי כל בשמיים ובארץ, לך אדוני הממלכה ויעמיד נעשה לכל לראש. And because we are using the Torah for the first time, we're going to say a Shehechianu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Shehechianu v'kiyemanu v'higiyanu lazeman hazeh.
Okay, so you can see, maybe, the yod is pointing to the first word of our parsha by Akel. As Cantor said, this Torah is 400 to 500 years old. Some maybe say it could actually go back to the Inquisition, or yes, Linda Cobbleson told us this on Thursday night. Linda's here. She'll be lecturing on this in a bunch of weeks, but okay, for right now.
Next week.
Next week,
The 21st.
yes, 21st. Thank you.
We're very fortunate to be joined this morning, not only by so many friends from Brotherhood, but also our Soferet, our Jewish ritual scribe, Linda Coppelson, who's an expert in Jewish ritual items like a Torah. She's written many, many Torahs and Mezuzot and Megillot, and she has been helping us research our Torah, and she's a good friend now to our community, a new friend, and we're very fortunate to have her with us. We'll see her in a moment. She's going to chant Torah for us. But first,
Okay, first the honor of the first Aliyah. Sandy, I don't have your first name, but you'll tell it to me. What is it? What's your not your Hebrew name? I know your first name. What's your Hebrew name?
What is my name?
Remember?
Yisrael.
Yisrael. All right.
That's what I was told.
What? Okay.
That's my understanding. That's what I was told. And what makes it fun is my Hebrew name is Yisraela.
Yisrael v'Yisraela.
Okay, yeah, Amod, Sandy, Yisrael, Lichvod Torah, your son of whom? Ben? It's okay.
Joseph and Bluma.
Yisrael, Ben, Yosef, Luba, Lichvod Torah. First Aliyah, which the first Aliyah, we're beginning at beginning chapter 35 of Exodus. And Matt Motion, you will be chanting. So go for it, Sandy. Thank you.
Okay. Baruch Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch
Baruch Adonai Baruch Leolam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach Leolam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bo karbono mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et torto. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Can you highlight the Torah, please? Torah Cam.
Awesome.
Amen. Vayakahel Moshe et kol adat b'nei Yisrael v'yomar aleichem ele hadvarim asher tzivah Adonai la'asot otam. Sheshet yamim te'aseh melecha uvayom hashvi yeh lechem kodesh Shabbat Shabbaton la'Adonai kol haoseh bo melacha yumat lo tava'aru esh kol moshvotechem Bayom HaShabbat.
Beautiful. Matt, wonderfully done. Sandy.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher notan lanu Torah emet v'kayei olam notar b'sokeinu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Beautifully done, Matt and Sandy. Pete Tufel. Pete, you're up for the next Aliyah. That will be Dana chanting at verse 4. Pete, what do we know your Hebrew name?
My teacher in Hebrew school always called me Ellie.
Ellie, son of whom?
Shepsel. My dad's name was Sherman. Shepsel.
Shetzel?
Shepsel.
Okay, Ya'amod, Eli ben Shepsel, Lichvoda Torah.
Baruch Hu es Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Borach Leolam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Leolam Vaed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam. Asher bochar bonu mikol ho'amim. V'notan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen.
ויאמר משה את כל הדת בני ישראל לאמור, זה הדבר אשר ציווה אדוני לאמור, קחו מאיתכם תרומה לאדוני, כל נדיב ליבו יביאיה את תרומת אדוני, זהב וכסף ונחושת, ותכלת וארגמן, ותולעת שני, ושש ועזים, ואורות אלים מאוד עמים, ואורות תחשים, ועצי סיתים. ושמן למאור, ושמן למאור, ובשמים לשמן המשחה, ולקטורת הסמים, ואבני שוהם, ואבני מילואים, לאפוד ולחושן, וכל חכם לב, sorry.
Take your time.
וכל חכם לב בכם יבואו ויעשו את כל אשר ציווה אדוני.
Nice. Thank you, Dana. Wonderful. And Pete.
Yes.
Blessing.
Baruch Hu es Adonai Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher notan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam notah b'tokeinu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen.
Beautifully done, Pete. For the next blessing, we've got our wonderful Stu Botwinick, who's going to be the Mivarach, the blesser. Right, Stu, won't you? It's a little heavy-handed on my part, but I don't know. So, are you there, Stu? Yamod. Stu, what's your Hebrew name?
Simcha Reuven ben Yitzchak.
Someone Reuben, I didn't hear them. Oh, Simcha Reuben ben Yitzchak. Torah. And Linda will be picking up at verse 11.
Baruch Hu et Adonai Haborach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Leolam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Haborach Leolam Vaed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'natan Lanu et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen.
Linda?
את המשכן, את אוהלו ואת מכסהו, את כרסיו ואת קרשיו, ואת בריחיו, ואת עמודיו ואת אדניו, את הארון ואת בדיו, ואת הכפורת ואת פרוכת המסך, את השולחן ואת בדיו, ואת כל כליו, ואת לחם הפנים. ואת מנורת המאור, ואת כליה ואת נרותיה, את שמן המאור, ואת מזבח הקטורת ואת בדיו, ואת שמן המשחה, ואת קטורת הסמים, ואת מסך הפתח לפתח המשכן.
Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Natan Lanu Torat Emet V'chayei Olam Nata B'Torat Emet V'chayei Olam Nata Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Double.
Amen. Beautifully done, Linda. Linda chanted, one of the words she chanted actually is Hama'il, the robe. And this is the robe of our ancient Sephardic Torah. And part of the mystery here, I'm showing, here we go. You can see it looks like it's sort of seen better days. It's definitely weathered. And one of the pieces of the mystery of this Torah, which we're still trying to unravel like this Me'il, is the story of how it got here. And we're told that this Me'il, this robe, probably came from Central Europe or Eastern Europe. It was that style. That's what we're told anyway. So it adds to the mystery. How did a Sephardic Torah end up in Eastern Europe? Or how did an Eastern European Me'il end up in Morocco? And how did they both end up in Great Neck? So thank you, Linda, for chanting so beautifully. Linda's going to be teaching a class on next Sunday, I believe, the 21st, correct? Right. So please, we're going to learn more about the scroll and all of its, what makes it Sephardic, what makes it so special, down to the letters and the columns and the parchment on which it's written itself. So thank you so much for joining us this morning, Soferet Koppelson. We're very, very honored that you're here and to be here amongst the brothers. Our final aliyah
is Chazan, our cantor. Is this you?
That's me.
Yes, okay. Yamod Hechazan Avram Afoyo ben Yitzchak Meir
Belasara
Lichvod Torah. We'll be picking up on verse 16.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai Barach Leolam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Barach Leolam Vaed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'natan Lanu et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Et Mizbach HaOlah. Et Michbah HaNechoshet Asher Lo. Et Badayo V'et Kol Kelav v'et hakior v'et kano, et klei chatzer, et amudav, et adoneha, v'et masach shar hechatzar, et yitdot hamishkan, et yitdot hechatzer, et meit rehem, et bigdei hasrad lesharet ba'kodesh, et bigdei hakodesh laron hakohen, et bigdei vanav lechahen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata betochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Shehechianu for our first Torah reading from our scroll. We already did it. I know we already did it. Okay, so beautiful. We're going to now offer we'll raise and dress the Torah as Cantor Adam prepares to do that. I just want to mention that our wonderful congregant Steve Fenn has begun the process and is maybe, 50%, 40% of the way through digitizing our sacred ancient Torah. And there are lots of opportunities to actually be with him. You could actually provide him great, Stu. Provide Steve a hand that can help. So Steve volunteered, offered to photograph in very high quality every panel of the Torah. Steve, who's been around the world in many different amazing professional photography projects, offered to do this for us, and we are incredibly grateful to you, Steve, and to Frida and your family. You are all a blessing.
This is an important part of our Torah celebration project to help conserve this precious object, to take high-resolution photos so that scholars and academics can study it close up in high definition. So we're very, very grateful.
Okay, and so Cantor, are you going to be our Hagba, Magbia? So,
Yes.
Be on page 252. And so with the Torah scroll out, with the words, one of the things that our wonderful guest, Mati Friedman, will speak about, I think, is like, why is a Torah scroll and a codex that teaches all Jews for eternity how to scribe a scroll, why is it so important? And somehow we as Jews have felt for thousands of years that if we can be really close to the word, somehow we're close to the deliverer, the author of the word as well. And so for that reason, with the Torah out, is why Jews forever have offered a prayer for healing, a prayer for the community, for nation, for Israel, with the Torah scroll out. We cannot be closer than to the Holy One of Blessing than when the words of God are out, and we've just read them. So Stu Luber, or no, first our prayer for healing. So please send in a chat any names of loved ones that you are thinking about. And our Misha Berach is on page 253.
Misheberach Avotenu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Mekor HaBracha L'Avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shelema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say,
Beautiful. And Stu Luber, if we can ask you to offer a prayer for the community and a presentation for dear Alan, please, Stu.
Are we unmuted here?
Yes, you are.
Okay. The prayer for our congregation, source of all being. May the children of this community learn these passions from us. Love of Torah, devotion and prayer, and support of the needy. May we guide with integrity, and may our leadership be in your service. May those who teach and nourish us be blessed with satisfaction, and may we appreciate their time and their devotion. Bless us with the fruits of wisdom and understanding, and may our efforts bring fulfillment and joy. Okay.
Stu.
Okay, we're continuing now with the presentation. Is that right?
Yes, please.
Okay. At this point in our Shabbat morning service, Brotherhood is pleased to honor one of its own, and it's my pleasure to say a few words on behalf of Alan Lowenkron. Alan is really a very easy person to speak about. He's a family man, and he checks all the boxes as husband and father, son, brother, uncle, and of course, son-in-law. Alan is a successful businessman, has provided handsomely for his family. And you might say, well, you know, isn't that enough? Isn't that Dayenu? But Alan has gone on to be involved in the temple, past president of Brotherhood. And the last couple of years, he's been one of the most active volunteers at the Interfaith Food Pantry at St. Al's. He does a number of things there every week, from buying food, bringing it to the pantry, assembling the boxes, and he's there every other Saturday morning for the purpose of distributing the food. Alan is one of those volunteers who does not have to be explained what needs to be done or told to do something. We've seen many times he just looks around, decides what needs to be done, and just does it. Judaism, as you know, speaks carefully and thoroughly about volunteers and charity, whether it's Hesed, it's Tzedakah, or Tikkun Olam. It's clear that the highest form of charity is that which is done anonymously. And that really carefully describes Alan. He probably was reluctant to accept this award. He may have said, give it to somebody else. And he has said many, many times that the satisfaction that he gets from helping out at the food pantry, feeding other people, is all the thanks that he would need. So Alan, we say to you that you represent the highest form of values, the highest form of ideals. And these are the characteristics of brotherhood. And we mean brotherhood with a capital B, we mean brotherhood with a lowercase b. So on behalf of this congregation and our brotherhood, we wish you and your family health and happiness, all the best, and we congratulate you on this award.
Beautiful. Alan, you going to share a word or more?
Well,
Rabbinic
not a
word?
lot to add to that. Stu, you pretty much covered it all. You know, it's very humbling to receive this, and you know, I am just glad to be able to support those less fortunate within our community. But you know, more importantly, the bigger picture is all the support that comes from our temple community to those less fortunate, whether it's the food pantry and so many other things that happen throughout, you know, the year and the past years. It's obviously been a difficult year for those in our community. Pretty consistent. It was 50 families. We've more or less are providing food for well over 100. And again, without the support of this congregation, we wouldn't be able to do as much as we're doing. So thank you for the recognition, but it's really, as I like to say, there's no I in team. It's a team effort. So to everybody here and those that couldn't be here, thank you very much. And it's much appreciated. Thank you.
Alan, thank you. I think, you know, in Webster's, if you look up Mensch in Webster's, your name, your picture will be one of the pictures and names there. You're the humility and the grace and you just do it all with such a generous heart. Chacham Lev. Dana, that was what you were chanting. You chanted it very wonderfully. A Chacham Lev, a generous and wise heart. Okay, Stu, thank you. Alan, thank you. We turn from our prayer for community to prayer for the nation. Phil Perlman. Phil.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Am I unmuted? Yes. Okay. Thus says Adonai, this is what I desire, to unlock the fetters of wickedness and untie the cords of lawlessness, to let the oppressed go free and to break every yoke. Share your bread with the hungry and take the wretched poor into your home. When you see the naked, give clothing and do not ignore your own kin. If you banish the yoke from your midst, the menacing hand, the evil speech, you will offer compassion to the hungry and satisfy the famished creature. Then your light shall shine in darkness. O guardian of life and liberty, may our nation always merit your protection. Teach us to give thanks for what we have by sharing it with those who are in need. Keep our eyes open to the wonders of creation and alert to the care of the earth. We may never be lazy in the work of peace. May we honor those who have died in defense of our ideals. Grant our leaders wisdom and forbearance. May they govern with justice and compassion. Help us all to appreciate one another and to respect the many ways that we may serve you. May our homes be safe from affliction and strife, and our country be sound in body and spirit. Amen.
Amen. Phil, thank you so much. You bring such a light and a Chacham Lev quality to a generosity. Raises us all up. So thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
Your prayers on behalf of the nation. And lastly, one last blessing prayer we offer before introducing our special guest, Mati Friedman, is our prayer for Israel. First, David Weiss Horowitz, you're going to offer it in English, and then Cantor Adam will lead us in Avinu Shebashamayim.
Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May those who love you prosper. O Heavenly One, Protector and Redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel, which marks the dawning of hope for all who seek peace. Shield it beneath the wings of your love. Spread over it the canopy of your peace. Send your light and truth to all who lead and advise, guiding them with your good counsel. Establish peace in the land and fullness of joy for all who dwell there. Amen.
Great memory being in Israel with you, David, you and Susan. Cantor, Avinu Sheba Shamayim, page 259, for all with the Siddur.
Avinu Sheba Shamayim, Zu Yisrael v'Goalo. Avinu Sheba Shamayim, Zu Yisrael v'Goalo. Barech et Medinat Yisrael, Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu, Again Aleha Bevrar Chazdecha, Ufras Aleha Sukat Shlomecha. Avinu Sheba Shamayim, Zu Yisrael v'Goalo. Avinu Sheba Shamayim, Zu Yisrael v'Goalo. Ushloch orecha ve'amitecha v'rashei asareya v'yoatzeya v'taknem be'etza tova v'taknem be'etza Avinu Sheba Shamayim, Zu Yisrael v'Goalo. Avinu Sheba Shamayim, Zu Yisrael v'Goalo. ונתת שלום בארץ ושמחת עולם ליושביה ונאמר Amen.
Beautiful. And so we arrive at our moments of our primary, our special guest speaker. And if I can just offer a few words of introduction and a bio, a history of Mati, who has achieved so much in his young life. Formerly an AP journalist in several places around the world. I talked about this Thursday night. Contributed to the New York Times. But most importantly, where I want to start is Mati is the author of 3 prize-winning books. I'm not going to tell you about them in the order in which they're published, but these are the order in which I read them. Pumpkin Flowers, which if you've wondered about the very challenging, very difficult years of war that Israel was in the mid-1990s until 2000, this is a book about that time in Lebanon that, as Mati pointed out, every other war has a name. That one doesn't have a name even. And so Pumpkin Flowers is about a little place in Lebanon, just over the border of Israel, that the pumpkin was the sort of code name of the place. Flowers, sadly, were the people who died there. It's a great, really compelling book. Second book is, so that's 1990s, 2000. Go back 50 years, Spies of No Country. It's about a number of 4 different Sephardic Middle Eastern men who Mati tells the story of their lives, which are somewhat connected, but the lives of 4 human beings with such courage, but they were truly only human beings, and all from Sephardic Middle Eastern backgrounds, and how important they were, but also we know the way in which this founding Zionist society was not so generous to the Sephardim, Spies of No Country. And then the Aleppo Codex, the book we're talking about today. And the Aleppo Codex, we're going to ask a lot of questions about the Aleppo Codex of Mati, a book that is about a scroll. It's about, that was 1,000, 1,100 years old. I want to just conclude this introduction. As I said, each of these books, including Aleppo Codex, was a prize-winning book. I had the pleasure and privilege of meeting Mati just about 2 years ago. In this COVID world, it's hard to remember like when anything happened, how long ago things happened. Mati, I assume you know when you were in Great Neck. I'm guessing was your last trip to the States. Mati was brought by APAC to speak to a collection of rabbis, fairly small group, 20-ish rabbis at Temple Israel. And he's one of these people who, as soon as you meet him, as soon as I met him, like, oh my gosh, I really like this person. I would be so lucky to get to know him. And on top of all that, it turns out that Mati lives with his wonderful wife and children just a few steps away from where Tara and our children are. So with all of that, I want to welcome you, Mati, and maybe just open with sort of a general question about a highlight or two that led you to this book, to the work that you ultimately did on the Aleppo Codex. So thank you a ton, 1,000 times over. There it is. Oh, perfect. Milchaba Li Shem. So Mati, tell us about any of that. I don't need to tell you what to say.
First of all, Rabbi Feldman, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with you virtually. I wish we could do this in person. It would be nice to get back to the States. Looks like maybe we're moving in the right direction, but let's hope. But Shabbat Shalom from here in Jerusalem. It's a pleasure to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is the manuscript that's called the Aleppo Codex. And I was just struck by that Torah scroll that we just saw on the screen, which is much younger than the Aleppo Codex, but old, and gives you a sense of how important the word is in our tradition. I stumbled on this story basically by mistake, as I've stumbled on most of the stories that I've written. I was a reporter for the AP, the Associated Press, the big US news agency. This was 2008. And when you're an AP reporter, what you have to cover all the time basically is the conflict. What did Netanyahu say? What did Abbas say? How many rockets? Back and forth. It's an awful and very boring story. And I was looking for any way that I could find to get out of writing regular news. And I discovered that if you could come up with a good biblical archaeology story, they'd let you get out of the news coverage. So I started looking for stories about archaeology in Jerusalem, anything that had to do with King David, Jesus, Abraham, that kind of stuff. And I was at the Israel Museum in the summer of 2008, and I was at the Shrine of the Book, which is the building where I'm sure most of, or many of you have visited, that kind of unique building with the dome, the white domed roof, where they keep the Dead Sea Scrolls. So if you go into the top floor of that building, you'll see the scrolls, the Qumran scrolls, which are very famous. And if you go down the stairs in that building into the basement, basically, you'll find a different book, a different manuscript. And I walked down the stairs, the top floor was full, the bottom floor was empty, and there was a book there that I understood from the labels was probably the most important book in Judaism. And it was called the Aleppo Codex, and I'd never heard of it. And I grew up in a fairly educated Jewish home, and I thought I knew the lay of the land more or less, but I'd never heard of the Aleppo Codex. And I couldn't understand how it was possible that the most important manuscript in the Jewish world was completely foreign to me. So I sat down that summer to write a story about it for the AP, a story that I prefer you don't go to read because most of it's wrong. I kind of wrote a pretty, superficial account based on what I could glean from making a few phone calls and doing a few weeks of research. But as soon as I tried to move beyond the superficial level of the story and write something deeper, people stopped answering my questions and wouldn't return my phone calls. And it seemed to me that there was a much bigger story here that was concealed beneath the fairly simple seeming story of the Aleppo Codex. And that's what I ended up writing in this book. It took me a few years, and it ended up dragging me into a pretty wild world. Not all of it nice, but all of it fascinating, and all of it, for me, an education into the importance of the word in our tradition, the importance of the book in our tradition. We just saw it happen virtually, but Jews around the world today took out a book from a cupboard in a synagogue. And it looks a bit, funny because it's a scroll. That's the way they used to write books, but it's just a book, and it's removed, and everyone stands up as if a member of, as if the president just walked into the room, as if a member of the royal family just walked into the room. The book often wears a crown, as if it itself is royalty. we kiss it as it moves by us. These are very unique behaviors for a book. And the importance of this book is at the heart of our story and is at the heart of the secret of Jewish survival through the years. And at the heart of all of that is the Aleppo Codex. I think Rabbi Feldman, you're muted.
How did I do that? Okay. I just, to begin, you're talking about the shrine of the book, which just as a coincidence, if you believe in them or not, if we don't, to mention that the shrine of the book the architect was Bartos, I believe, who also was the architect of this very room that Cantor Adam and I and all the rest of us Beth-Elers have been in. So the architect of this place in the Israel Museum, Shrine of the Book, and Temple Beth-El's main sanctuary, it's the same person. So there's something meaningful in that.
Coincidence?
Coincidence, exactly. If you believe coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. So Mati, and we'll have a chance for you all, for friends, to ask questions. So write them down, collect them for yourselves, and then share them with us. But just as as warm-ups, like, have you actually seen the codex itself, the crown, and have you been able to see how it's stored or not? I actually don't remember whether you had.
If you go to the Shrine of the Book and you go down into the gallery where the Aleppo Codex is kept, and you called it the crown, which might be worth a word of explanation, the book in Hebrew is called Keter Aram Tzova, the crown of Aleppo. In Hebrew, the city of Aleppo, which is an important city in Syria, is called Aram Tzova. It appears in the Bible. And this book is the crown of Aleppo. So when we call it the crown, that's really the Jewish term for this book that is more commonly known as the Aleppo Codex. If you go into the gallery, you'll see something that looks like the Codex. It looks like an ancient book with 2 pages that are visible. And if you're just passing through the gallery, you will assume that that's the Codex, but actually it's fake. And in kind of a symbolic way for a story that involves many layers of deception and lies, that is actually just a kind of a curator's trick. The top 2 pages are real, but everything else is just a dummy volume. The actual codex is kept in the same building, but to get into the safe, you need a lock, a key to a lock from the security guard. That opens up a room. You need a magnetic card, a code, another lock, and then you're in the safe where the Qumran scrolls and the Aleppo Codex are kept. And I have been inside and I have seen the Codex, or what's left of it, because a big part of the story is, as you know, Rabbi Feldman, that much of the book is missing. That's part of what makes the story interesting.
Why don't you speak with us, Mati, about what's missing today and for, I believe, since about 1957 or 8, and give us sort of a synopsized history of the crucial shifts that happened, from say 48 to, for that next decade, or a couple years, not decade, when it came into the hands of the Jewish state.
Sure. I mean, the Codex, maybe it's worth starting a bit before in the year 70 CE. As all Jewish stories, you can't just start, last week. We have to go back 2,000 years because we all know when it starts. So, until 70 CE, the Jews exist as a nation like most other nations. They have a country, they have a language, they have a ritual, they go to the, one ritual center, which is the temple. They have a political system that binds them. After the destruction of the temple, Jews start floating away. And they get farther and farther from the mothership, which is here in Israel or in Judea. And they start speaking different languages and they answer to different political systems. And they speak, then they're parts of different cultures. And if this people is going to survive as a people, they need some radical new idea for how to stick together, because it's not going to be borders and it's not going to be a government. They need some other idea. And the idea that they come up with works so well that we don't even think about it anymore, even though it's incredibly unlikely and should never have worked. The idea that they invent is that this people is going to be held together by words. No matter what country they're in, they're going to read the same book at the same time. And that is going to tie together Jews who might be in Yemen, and they might be in Poland, and they might be in Long Island, and they might be in Toronto, where I grew up. And that seems like a crazy idea, and yet it works. And most of us have never met, and yet we're talking about the same thing centuries after our relatives had anything to do with each other. So this mechanism somehow really works. But if it's going to work, everyone needs to be reading exactly the same book. Because even if there are minute differences in the text, that could lead to a split in the religion. That could lead to a different interpretation and a split in the Jewish religion. So everyone has to agree on every single word in this book. So you need like an atomic clock. You need a book that is the book, the authoritative version of the Bible, which is then going to be copied and spread throughout the Jewish world to enable the Jews in Yemen to read the same book that is being read in Warsaw or in New York. The process of creating that book, the atomic clock, happens in the city of Tiberias in Israel, where I'm sure many of you have visited, on the Sea of Galilee. And it happens about 1100, 1200 years ago. A group of scholars redacts the text. They invent a system of vowels. You know, Hebrew vowels, the dots and lines that appear under the letters, those are invented by these rabbis in Tiberias. And eventually they create what becomes known as the authoritative version of the Tanakh, all 24 books of the Jewish Bible. And that book, which is written by a scribe and an editor in the year 930 CE, about 1100 years ago, that book is the Aleppo Codex. It wasn't called the Aleppo Codex until much later because it wasn't written in Aleppo, and it only arrives there centuries after that. But that's the book. The same manuscript that I'm talking about in the Israel Museum is the one that was written around 930 CE in Tiberias. And from Tiberias, it moves around. It ends up in the old city of Jerusalem, where it's stolen by crusaders, and it gets ransomed by the Jews of Cairo, ends up in Cairo on the desk of the greatest Jewish mind of the last 2,000 years, Maimonides, the Rambam, who's the head of the Jewish community in Cairo. And when he writes a tractate, part of his great legal work, Mishneh Torah, about how to write a Torah scroll, he uses this Bible. He uses this Tanakh. And if it's good enough for the Rambam, that means it's good enough for the rest of us. And he gives it a kind of kashrut stamp that still holds to this day. We still consider this codex to be the authoritative version of the text. This is a very short version of the story, Rabbi Feldman, but it goes from Cairo to Aleppo with one of the descendants of the Rambam, his great-grandson's grandson, takes it to Aleppo. It's there in the 1400s and spends 6 centuries locked in a safe in Aleppo, being treated as a kind of a talisman of the Jewish community of Aleppo. And because you're in the New York area, I'm sure that you have encountered the Syrian Jewish community centered in Flatbush. The Aleppo Jews, the Jews who come from Aleppo, Halab, call themselves Halabim. They're the kind of backbone of the Syrian Jewish community. It's a fascinating community. They have stories that they tell about this book. The punchline of these stories is always that the book may not be moved. There's one story that says once someone took the book out of its safe in the great synagogue of Aleppo, and plague struck the community, and the plague only abated when the book was returned. There's another story that says that the book was once taken out of the safe, and it magically reappeared in the safe. The punchline, the moral of the story was always that this book, the Aleppo Codex, Keter Aram Tzova, may not leave the city of Aram Tzova, of Aleppo. And if it ever does leave the community will be destroyed. And if you speak to old Jews from Aleppo, which I spent a long time doing when I was writing this book, a lot of them will tell you, well, listen, we're not superstitious people. So there are these stories, you move the book, the community will be destroyed. We don't believe that, we're not superstitious. And then they'd lower their voice and they'd say, well, it happened. Because it happened in 1947, the partition resolution at the United Nations, not far from where you guys are sitting right now in Queens, partitions this, what eventually becomes the state of Israel, British Mandate Palestine. There are riots across the Arab world that target the Jewish communities of the Arab world. At the time, there are 1 million Jews living in the Islamic world, which is hard to imagine today. One of the communities that's targeted is a community in Aleppo. One of the buildings that is burned is the Great Synagogue of Aleppo, and the Codex vanishes in the fall of 1947, November 30th, 1947. And before I wrap up this very long answer, I'll just point out that the book has no copies in the fall of 1947. It's never been photographed. The rabbis in Aleppo won't allow it to be photographed. So the most perfect copy of the Hebrew Bible, the Bible that we need in order to copy perfect Torah scrolls, the text that Rambam, that Maimonides declared to be the most authoritative version of the most important book for us. The book has no copy. So if the book disappears, it's gone. There's no Library of Congress. There's no Kindle. It's not scanned. It's gone. And in the fall of 1947, the Codex vanishes. And that's really where my book starts. So this very long answer was basically a long introduction to the story of the Aleppo Codex in the 20th century.
But I mean, it's not a too long introduction, Mati. I think that you frame in the book in a beautiful way, a compelling way, this unbelievable kind of revolutionary idea that we Jews came up with, that we can stay together, we can remain and even strengthen ourselves as a family through the word, through a book that becomes our sacred place. The word is our sacred place. And I think you do that beautifully in speaking about the why we cherish this book, having been in the hands of Maimonides. You speak about it in describing that in some of the different exoduses throughout Jewish history, they cared more about preserving their texts, their scrolls, or not more, but we could preserve our scrolls. And so there was such incredible intensity and determination to carry with us our scrolls that we had, the most original being from Ben Asher, I think you said in 930. Who knows what scroll he worked from. But you've brought us all the way forward to Kaf Tet November 29th, 1947, when when the UN votes. That's true. Many of you are in Lake Success. Some of you are, and you're only steps away from the former UN offices there. So, Mati, if you would, why don't you zero in, as you've really brought us to this place, zero in on this short period of time between 47 and 29th of November 47, and then early with 51, 52, and like bring us into really the heart and maybe the tragedy and the perplexity of this story.
Sure, that's when the story really gets interesting. But you said something so interesting in your question, and we talked about it briefly earlier about the idea that books are more important than people in Jewish tradition, and you really see that idea, which sounds crazy, but it actually exists in Jewish history. This book is stolen by the Crusaders, and the Jews in Cairo need to get it and other Jewish manuscripts back, and there's no copy of it, right? They need the actual book. It's an object of incredible value, and they send an emissary to the Crusaders. They give him money. We know how much money because there's a letter that is found in the Cairo Geniza, and he goes off to bargain with the Crusaders, and his instructions are as follows. I'm just going to read it. It's very short and just so indicative of something amazing in our tradition. This amazing confusion about what books are exactly. They tell him to redeem the scrolls of the Torah and to attend to the ransoming of the people of God who are in the captivity of the kingdom of evil. May God destroy it. Books come first, right? You got to get the people out of captivity, but first you have to get the books. And the confusion about whether books are actually alive is such an interesting one in Judaism. And I might have missed the part of the service, but when we have a Torah scroll out on Shabbat, we say Etz Chaim hi lamachazikim ba. It's a tree of life for those who hold it. Life. There's something about this book that's not an inanimate object. And when a Torah scroll goes out of commission, what do you do with it? Bury it, right? Who buries books? You don't bury books. You bury people. And the book, wears a hat, right? It wears a crown in many cases. And I remember learning as a child and growing up in Toronto, apparently this tradition has no halachic validity, but it is a tradition that a lot of people know that if you need a minyan, you need 10, in Orthodox tradition, you'll need 10 males to pray. But if you don't have a minyan, you only have 9 males. The 10th can be a child under the age of 13 and a Torah scroll. That constitutes the 10th for a minyan. So as a Torah scroll, half of a person or a third of a person, in any case, it's not inanimate, right? Because you can't count the bench for the minyan. So there's just something amazing in that confusion, which is so Jewish. But back to your question, in the fall of 1947, there's a riot in Aleppo. The Jewish community is gutted and never recovers. Within 10 years, basically, everyone is gone, and many of them are your neighbors in Flatbush, and the codex disappears. And the codex appears first to have been destroyed. News reaches Bible scholars here in Jerusalem that the Aleppo Codex is gone, and this causes, people are heartbroken because, again, there's no copy of it. So if you want to create a perfect Torah scroll, you can now not do that without the original codex. I'm not giving anything away if I say that the codex wasn't actually destroyed. And the news that it was burned in the fire at the Great Synagogue by the rioters was actually misinformation that was spread by the elders of the Jewish community in Aleppo to throw the Syrian authorities off the scent. The Syrian authorities had an idea that they knew that the Jewish community had something very valuable, this ancient book, and they apparently had been asking questions about it. And the Jews thought it would be prudent to make it go away. So they told everyone that it had been destroyed. What actually happened was that it was spirited out of the synagogue and hidden in a warehouse owned by a Jewish textile merchant in the old market of Aleppo. We know his name. His name is Ibrahim Effendi Cohen. He hides the book for 10 years. The Aleppo Codex is in hiding in Aleppo for 10 years, at which point the rabbis, two rabbis who are heading the Jewish community, make a decision. They need to make a pretty hard decision, right? The traditions about this book say it may not be moved. That's the moral of every story about the Aleppo Codex. It is the talisman of the community, and the end of the book in Aleppo is the end of the community in Aleppo. So the rabbis sit down at the end of 1957, and they realize that the community is dead. They realized that the Aleppo Jewish community, which is one of the oldest continually functioning Jewish communities in the world, they've been praying on the same site in the old city of Aleppo since the 5th century CE. Jews have been in Aleppo way before the destruction of the temple. So it's an ancient community by the time the temple in Jerusalem is destroyed. It's very, very old. So the idea that there won't be Jews in Aleppo now seems crazy, right? Now we're used to the idea that there are no Jews in the Arab world, but that wasn't obvious in the early 50s. And the rabbis decide they've got to get the book out. And it's an admission that the Jewish world that existed in Arab lands is dead. An incredible historical moment that I think is worth kind of, grasping its import. We know a lot about the death of the Jewish world of Europe. We don't know that much or we don't know enough. We don't talk enough about the death of the Jewish world in Islamic lands. But when the Codex leaves Aleppo in 57, that's really what it is. It's the end of Jewish life in Syria and across the Arab world.
Wow. I want to, in a moment, Linda Coppelson, I'm going to ask you to ask a question before, just as you're preparing, Linda. I'm just thinking, Mati, I do want to put in a little plug. It's kind of politically incorrect, but I want to be a melitz for the extraordinary significance and priority of a book over possibly any individual life. For us as a people, I think there is I don't know, there's something powerful about it. All of us are going to die. And so I think there's a lot to criticize in what happened. But I don't know, it's fun saying kind of controversial things. But I want to ask Linda, if you're there, I know you're here, to share your question. Are you? No. Okay. Are you unmuted?
Yeah, I think so. I just had an issue with my computer, so now I'm on my phone. But that.
Okay.
Put you on the spot, but I'm going to read what I wrote. The story of the Aleppo Codex outraged me as a Jew and as a Soferet. As a Soferet, I felt a visceral sadness and anger that the most important part of the Codex, the Torah, was destroyed or lost or most likely stolen. It was a direct link, not just to the 10th century, but to the very origins of the Jewish faith and the narrative that tells our story. One only has to think about the sources and traditions that Ben Asher and Ben Ruya analyzed and copied to create the crown, to realize that their ink came directly from the quills of First Temple scribes. And for this theft to have been perpetrated by Jews against other Jews only magnifies the depravity of the crime. And as I read your book, I felt your outrage and frustration. So my question is, how did what you learned change how you feel about Israel in particular, and about your own Jewishness in general?
That's a great a great and deep question. I certainly wasn't expecting to write the book that I eventually wrote. When I got into the story of the Aleppo Codex, I understood that it was basically a heroic story about how a great book returned home. It was lost and it returned home. And if you go to the shrine of the book and read the labels, basically that's the idea that you'll get. That's not the story, unfortunately, I guess, as a Jew, fortunately as a journalist, because who wants some nice boring story when you can write a good dirty story? But of course, it's not it's not a lovely story about human nature. The only, I guess, thing that I could say a few things. I'm an Israeli journalist. I've been here for 25 years. So part of what I do as a journalist, a big part, is criticizing the country where I live. So that's my job. It doesn't undermine my love for the country. Just as an American journalist, has to write all kinds of critical stuff about American government agencies. And it doesn't mean you don't love America. In fact, the act of criticizing it and bringing it to light is in many ways an act of love. If I didn't care about the country and I didn't want it to be better, I would, then I wouldn't do any of this. The irony of exactly what you're talking about, this crimes, we don't exactly know. There might have been multiple thefts, or there might have been just one. The fact that it was committed by Jews and quite possibly was committed here is all that one can say, and I try to say it at the end of the book, is that the book predicted it. The book, if you read the book, it knows everything about human weakness that that's possible to know. And from the beginning of the book of Bereshit, from the beginning of Genesis, we're hearing stories about people screwing up. And they're supposed to do one thing and they do another thing. They're given a Garden of Eden. They're given paradise and they mess it up because they can't control themselves and they take things that they shouldn't be taking and they do things they shouldn't be doing. The irony in this story, of course, is that the page that says "Thou shalt not steal" gets stolen. So that's human nature. I don't think it's anything specific to Jews or Israel. It's the way we are. And the fact that this book falls victim to the vices that it is designed to heal. And that's the great irony of the story of the Codex.
Mati, did you feel, I don't know, maybe, did you feel nervous writing the book? Like your own safety was a little bit or more than that threatened, or there was like this little voice on your shoulder that might be entering into a neighborhood that's not, you get it.
There were a few moments. I mean, I don't want to overdo, how much danger I was in this particular story, but there were times when I was a bit nervous. Again, I won't give, I don't think I'm giving too much away. There's a murder in the story. So a dealer who seems to have had the Codex or part of the Codex ends up dead mysteriously in a Jerusalem hotel room in 1989. I was reading that. I was kind of diving into that story and I was thinking, what exactly am I involved in right now? There's a very prominent collector of biblical artifacts who appears in the story, who I guess taped surreptitiously in order to be able to prove that he was saying what he was saying, certain, dropping very interesting hints about where the Codex is and who might have it. And I was nervous doing that, of course. And there were people around him who seemed quite sketchy, and I had to be careful there. The actual or the most explosive conclusion that I published at the end of the book, I wasn't really worried about getting hurt by the people involved, but I was slightly concerned about getting sued, and I had to really nail down all the details with lawyers. What exactly can I say? How can I say it? So it ended up being a much trickier story than I had initially intended. That's the negative way of looking at it. The positive way is that it ended up being a much better story than I initially thought.
We'll spend a couple more minutes in conversation, and then we'll conclude our service, and then we'll open it up, friends, to Q&A. But we had a wonderful, Matt Motion, who's here with us, facilitated a wonderful conversation about the book for an hour and a half or so on Thursday evening. One of the thoughts that came out, and it struck me, was, there clearly is this enormous energy to protect some piece of information. What really happened to protect that, prevent that piece of information from coming out. And sort of it came out in the conversation, and it struck me in two different ways. Like, if it's some criminal act that someone committed, it doesn't really make sense to me that all the institutions, Ben Zvi and institutions of the state would have such motivation, would have any motivation to protect a criminal act, unless, of course, it was a criminal act committed by someone who came from a very prominent family. But even then, it struck me that, like Ben-Yahu, his father, I believe, or uncle was the chief rabbi, and
father.
His father. So do you imagine it was like, or maybe you actually feel like you really have a clear idea what happened, but do you think it was a criminal act? Do you think it was like this terrible, tragic accident that would just be incredibly embarrassing and the cost, immeasurable, because we're talking about 190 pages or something, all of the Torah? You get the question: criminal act, accident, negligent, that protecting, I don't know. There's a question there somewhere.
I think I identified it. The institutions, and particularly the Ben Zvi Institute, which is really the institution at the heart of the whole affair, still to this day, the owner de facto of the Aleppo Codex. They have control of the Codex. I don't think people at that institution today know that a crime was committed, but over the years, I think they've been afraid enough that a crime might have been committed under their purview that they have blocked any investigation into the story of the Codex. They will tell you today that the first director of the Institute, Gnayahu, is responsible for the disappearance of many, many manuscripts from the Ben Zvi collection. Manuscripts that are meant to be in a public collection end up in his private hands. They'll say that, and they deny any connection between that and the disappearance of Codex pages, and they insist to this day that the Codex arrived with its pages already missing. And then you say, okay, can you prove that? And they say, no, they can't prove it. So the only concrete description of missing pages in the Codex, the only document that shows us that what's missing today is missing, appears in March 1958. That's when we know that the Codex has the number of pages that it currently has. About 200 pages are missing out of about 500 that existed in the manuscript when it was written in Tiberias. In March, it's missing. The Codex arrives at the Ben Zvi Institute in January, and the Institute admits that dozens of manuscripts that existed in their collection at that time are now gone. So if you're, a journalist looking into this story, you'd be derelict if you didn't at least raise the possibility that a crime was committed at the Institute, and that the Institute, at the very best, always preferred not to look too deeply into it.
All right. One final question before we close the service and then open it up for Q&A. And I do want to we definitely, during the Q&A, want to just hear from you thoughts you have about the upcoming elections. We know that you have a crystal ball and are a perfect predictor of the future, and also just any brief thoughts about the Supreme Court decision. But before we get to that final stage, you've mentioned the Ben Zvi Institute and several in the book. You identify a handful of the people, all the people with whom you worked and who helped you understand the pieces of this story. And the Aleppo Codex is about 1,000+ years old, 1,100 years old. And the Torah that we have discovered, and there's so much we don't know, and Linda Koppelson, who asked you a question a couple minutes ago, her expertise and research shows that it's probably 400 to 500 years old, although she's spoken with someone recently who says it could well go back to the Inquisition. Do you think, Mati, that any of the people you've spoke, would you say to Linda or us, I would encourage you to reach out to Misha so-and-so or so-and-so. We are very much in touch with Michael McGinn at the Israel Museum, but if Al Regel Achat, or maybe we follow up with you on this if that's better.
No name comes to mind, but I think that you're geographically probably the best place in the world to get the best manuscript, Hebrew manuscript people on it, because not only do you have a big Haredi or ultra-Orthodox community close by with a lot of sofrim and a lot of experts on old manuscripts, and as well as people dealing in old manuscripts. You also have the big auction houses. Sotheby's has people who do Hebrew manuscripts, and a lot of those people will come and appraise a manuscript or have a look at it and see, when it's from. You've got the great museums there, so probably you're geographically located in a place that's even better than Jerusalem for some, well, that's not to say better than Jerusalem, just so we don't hurt Jerusalem's feelings, but it's as good. And the truth is, I would be very curious to know what they tell you. So be sure to let me know.
Okay. All right. That's great. All right, Mati, thank you a ton. We're going to come back to you. We'll take us about, whatever, 10-ish minutes to come to our conclusion. Friends, as Cantor Adams said a little while ago, get your questions collected and send them in on the chat as soon as we've completed offered Kaddish. So right now, we will turn to page 256 as we prepare for 282 for Aleinu. 282 Aleinu.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוסף בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל עמונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד.
And so we, as always, turn our minds, our hearts, our love to those who have passed. We remember in this Shabbat, this weekend, in which certainly New Yorkers, but really Americans all over the country are thinking, directing our prayers and our love to all who have suffered from COVID, all who have lost loved ones from COVID. Please send the names of loved ones you're thinking about into our chat. And I offer the names of our beloved members from the Beth-El community. In the past period Shloshim, remember Theodore Ted Roston and B. Schutzer. Remember as well those whose yortzeit falls in this week or on the Shabbat: Ilse Bauer, Burton Block, Kenneth Brown, Philip Dobbin, Beatrice Goldberg, Sanford Jaffe, Stuart Larrick, Sighard Rosenheck, Maria Savitt, Etta Schwartz, Claire Louise Siegel, Yetta Sherman, Bernard Wolf, and Morris Zale. And we remember all of those who we hold dear in our hearts. And we rise, if it's your custom, for Kaddish Yatom Mourner's Kaddish on page 294. 294. Yikadal v'kadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayachon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael b'galav izman kariv v'imru Amen.
Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam olamei almaya.
Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei d'kudashah brechu. Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata, da'miran b'yalma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us and to all Israel. And let us say one last time, amen. Okay, just a few brief announcements before we close with Kiddush and Motzi. Cantor and the shifts will lead us in Kiddush, and Joe Friedman. Joe, you will lead us in Kiddush and Motzi. Okay, sorry. So just A few brief announcements, mostly just tonight and tomorrow. Tonight, comedy night, 7 p.m. Go online to register. The wine tasting, the Sip and Say Craft, it's wonderful. That's at 7:20. We'll make Havdalah together, and comedy night begins at 8:20. Tomorrow morning, mitzvah day, and it'll be a wonderful, wonderful, meaningful opportunity. Cleaning at what is it called? Pond? What's it called? Something.
Whitney Pond Park.
Whitney Pond Park. Thank you, Tara, for joining in. Giving blood, Whitney Pond Park, and packing food. Those are the three primary things going on tomorrow. So please help us join in. Follow Alan Lowenkron's lead. And lastly, second night virtual Seder for Passover. That's March 28th, Sunday night, March 28th. Okay, Cantor. We turn now to the Shamru, yes?
Yes, let's make Kiddush.
Great.
Set up the wine for us. There we go. All right. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל עוד היא לעולם, עוד היא לעולם, עוד היא לעולם.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם.
כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם.
וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש.
שמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם.
All right, and let's Joseph Friedman.
Joe.
Unmute.
Go for it, Joe.
You have to unmute yourself first. There you go.
I did.
There we go.
Go for it.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen.
All right. And also B'rei Pri Hagafen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam B'rei Pri Hagafen. Amen.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Joe. You've made lots of challahs in your day and shared them with us at Beth-El.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This has been a wonderful service. I want to thank all the brothers and everyone else who participated. We're going to shift gears now and go into a...
Exactly. So we're going to go into a Q&A, and we can, if you need to go, of course, we understand, but we've got a wonderful more time with Mati, and so please make sure to send in your questions in the chats, and I want to sort of like create space for some other folks as questions are coming in. I will just share maybe one last question of my own, which is, Mati, do you feel like the fact that the Aleppo Codex was from Aleppo and not from from, one of the great Polish yeshivas made a difference? Like, would it have been treated differently between 1947 and 57 by the Zionists in Israel, had it been, sort of the Gedolei Hador as us Ashkenazi Jews saw ourselves?
It's an uncomfortable question, but I think the answer is yes. I mean, I think that if one of the great Ashkenazi communities had brought, an ancient manuscript to Israel, that community would have been allowed to keep it, because the establishment here would have recognized that a great yeshiva from Warsaw or Lodz had the, wherewithal to protect an ancient manuscript if they'd been doing that for the last 600 years. And I think there was an assumption on the part of the academic establishment here and the political establishment, which in this case was the same people, because Yitzhak Ben-Zvi was both the president and a scholar of ancient manuscripts. So he wore two hats, and the assumption was not evil. I think they weren't, terrible people, but it was a paternalistic assumption that these are primitive people. They're from the Middle East. What could they possibly know about preserving manuscript? We better take it. So they take it from the Aleppo community, and they make it the property de facto of the state of Israel, and then lose a big chunk of it, as far as we know. So the irony is that the Aleppo community protects this book in more or less perfect condition for about 600 years. And then something happens to it in the 20th century. And that's one of the terrible ironies of the story. So I think that the answer to your question is yes. And it's a deep fault line in the state of Israel to this day. The Aleppo Codex is kind of a metaphor here for a deeper problem with the clash between the founders of the state who came from Eastern Europe and the wave of Jewish immigrants who arrived here after 48 from the Islamic world, mostly from the Arab world. So if you look at the Jewish population today, half of the Jews in Israel don't come from Europe. They come from places like Aleppo. And the disdain that greeted them in the early years of the state lives on to this day in the way people feel and the way people vote. It's hard to understand the state of Israel without understanding that.
I want to touch on the question that Marcy has asked, but also a little plug for Mati. I think it's his second book, Spies of No Country, because this book it's about 4 spies. It's just beautiful how you have this great ability, Mati, in my opinion, to just help us understand the lives of very normal, average, could be anyone, but put their averageness into a historic context. And each of these 4 people were, of Arab origin, Sephardic origin. And you speak to the subject of the discrimination, really kind of the prejudice, the looking down on of the Jewish state, the founding Zionists. So that relates to the question I had asked. And also, Marcy, I think this is in your question. If you want to clarify it for yourself, I'm happy for you to, Marcy, but how frequent was the disappearance of holiday books from Arab Jewish exiles? Is there general discussion about this in Israel today?
There's another example that I mentioned in the book, which is the book manuscripts from Yemen. There's this wave of immigration from Yemen, an incredibly heroic and dramatic moment where the Jews of Yemen are airlifted out of Yemen and they arrive in the state of Israel, and many of their manuscripts go missing en route, and some of them pop up in libraries in Israel, some of them pop up on the manuscript market. So yes, there's a recurring problem. By the way, it's not just manuscripts from the Arab world, but I think that because of the paternalistic attitude of the state at the time, they were taken less seriously as curators of their own heritage. They needed to be helped by scientists who came from Eastern Europe. And that's really the clash in the story of the Aleppo Codex. That's what's going on at the trial that I discuss in the book. It's seemingly a legalistic discussion about ownership, but what it really is a question of what is this state that claims to be the curator of Jewish history? Who are the communities? What is the relation between a community like Aleppo and the state of Israel just a few years after it was founded? Yitzhak Ben-Zvi is the president of the state. His real name is Yitzhak Shimshalevich. He's a Jew from, where all the Jews came from in those days, Ukraine, Pale of Settlement. And the Jews from Aleppo thought nothing of these people. Who is this, peasant, socialist, secular, know nothing who's claiming to be the custodian of our book? The Jewish community of Aleppo believed itself with a lot of justice to be the flagship Jewish community of the Middle East. They had always been there. They had an incredible history. They were not nobodies, and they were being treated like nobodies, and it really stung. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, that many Aleppo Jews don't stay in Israel. They keep going. and they end up in New York, and they do very, very well in New York, which would not have been possible for them in the state of Israel. The relationship is mended. So today, we're all, many of us, most of us are part of the Zionist story. We believe in the state, including the Jews from Aleppo, but it wasn't that way. It wasn't that way at first. And I think it's really important to kind of start thinking about the state of Israel with the Jews of the Middle East in the center of the story, which is hard for those of us, myself included, who grew up in North American Jewish communities. The North American Jewish community is almost entirely Ashkenazi. But the Israeli Jewish community is half Mizrahi, half with origins in the Islamic world. And that's one reason that when you come to Israel as a Jew, it doesn't feel like a Jewish country the way you imagine it in New York. Like, where are the bagels? There are no bagels. If you look for Jewish food, you can't really find it because Israelis don't think that that's Jewish food. You go to the supermarket here, you'll see couscous and hummus and the food of the Levant, which is in North Africa, which is Jewish food for the kind of Jews who ended up populating the state. So these are two very different Jewish worlds today, growing increasingly different. And a main challenge, I think, for Western observers looking at Israel is making that leap to the Middle East, understanding that Jews from Yemen and Aleppo and Libya and Morocco are not a footnote to the Israeli story. They might be the main characters of the Israeli Jewish story. And that's what I tried to do in that book, Spies of No Country. I wanted to write a story about the founding of the state where all of the main characters came from the Arab world. That's the way I've come to see this country, having lived here for 25 years.
Wow. And Marcy asks a follow-up question. Does Islamic communities try to regain ownership from museums and collectors? I'm just connecting that thought, Marcy and Mati. Am I wrong? Didn't I read something just this week about Israel acknowledging the disappearance, not only of scrolls and texts, but of Yemenite children? Did I like dream that one night?
No, you didn't dream it. There's been a kind of somewhere between a vague historical memory, a painful memory for some families, and a conspiracy theory. It kind of blends together about the disappearance of the children of Yemeni immigrants in the early years of the state. It's unclear exactly what happened to this day. Nothing systematic happened. There wasn't, systematic kidnapping of Yemeni children, but it does seem that in some cases, in the kind of chaos of those years, in the chaos of the refugee camps, children were either died of illness and their parents were not informed, or their parents weren't present at the burial. It's possible that in certain cases, children were put up for adoption. And that happened many years ago, but it has been kind of bouncing around in the subconscious of the country, and the government has addressed it recently. And it's kind of a, whether it actually happened or not, it's a symbol or a symptom of this deep pain that many Israelis feel, which dates to the early years of the state, to arriving here, thinking that the time of the Messiah had arrived and expecting to be part of redemption, and instead to be treated like someone who didn't quite belong, to have your language mocked and your religious traditions mocked, because now we're all supposed to be secular Europe-oriented socialists, but the Jews from Yemen didn't want to be secular or Europe-oriented or socialist. They had a completely different idea of themselves, and Israel today has gone in their direction, I think, a great deal. It's a much more Middle Eastern place than the founders planned. It's a much more religious place than the founders planned. It's become a Middle Eastern Jewish country, but it took a long time, and over a few generations, people amassed a list of grievances, many of which are right. Not all of them are right, but many of which are right. And again, it shapes discourse in this country, and it shapes politics in this country. You might have heard that we have some politics in this country, and we have an election every couple of days. So, the only way to understand the election is to understand not just what Netanyahu may have said last week, but to understand these deep historical processes that have accompanied the country from the beginning of the state. One symptom of it was the story of the Aleppo Codex, but there are many other symptoms.
Wow. Thanks so much, Mati. A couple more questions, and then we'll move to our close. Dan, we're going to get to this question. Dan, you asked about what's the connection between losing the book and the founding of the state? We're going to get to that. We're going to link that to the two questions, contemporary questions. But I want to, Mike Zarin, I'm seeing your comment and question. And it raises a really critical theme or central theme. Let's say the sort of the fraud or the tragedy or the negligence of the missing, the lost, stolen, sold, pages, almost 200 pages of a 600-page Torah scroll. Let's say they weren't missing. Let's say that wasn't an issue, but there was a very real dispute. Whose are they? And Mike, Zarin, thank you. The question is, come on, obviously it's the property of the Aleppo community, maybe, or maybe not. Maybe it's really meant to be the property of the Jewish people. What is your view on this, Mati?
So it's a great question, and I don't have a clear opinion. I've gone back and forth over over many years of thinking about the start of the Aleppo Codex. So you have this trial. It's Jerusalem. It's the 1950s. You have this trial about who owns this book, and what they're really arguing about is who owns the heritage of the Jewish people. It's an amazing moment, and both sides have a pretty strong case. The Aleppo Jews say it's called the Aleppo Codex. It's ours. We've had it for 600 years. We did not intend to donate it to the state. That's clear, and that's what I read in the book, which, by the way, was the first time it had been written. It's clear that the Aleppo community did not voluntarily turn the codex over to the state. It was taken from them. So if they didn't intend to donate it, it should have stayed with them. That does raise a question, though, of who is the Aleppo community once they're not in Aleppo. You know what I mean? Like when they were in Aleppo, there were chief rabbis. It was kind of organized in a certain way, but now there are Aleppo Jews in Flatbush. Some of them are in Israel. Some of them are in Rio de Janeiro. There's a big community in Mexico City. Some of them are in Japan. Some of them are in Milan. Who's the Aleppo community? So who should own this book? It's a good question. Maybe it's better for the state of Israel to own the book in the name of the Jewish people. And today in 2021, I would say yes. I don't think that was true in the 1950s, but in 2021, I can think of no better place for the Codex than the Israel Museum, which is where it is. It should be available to everyone. Unfortunately, on the way, the manuscript seems to have been very badly damaged, quite possibly in the custody of the state. So there are certain questions about how this actually happened in the 1950s, what happened to the book, that are important and have never been completely settled, although I try to in the book. The question of ownership today is a tricky one. Today, I would leave it where it is. I don't think it needs to physically move from the Israel Museum, but I think the problematic process that led it to the museum has to be acknowledged.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're saying it right now, Mati, highlights something that I've kind of overlooked until this moment, that one of the most important qualities in life is to be able to acknowledge those moments in our lives when we've really made this serious mistake, and maybe lend it to your question. How does it make you feel, I don't know, less connected, less invested? And in some ways, I think when we acknowledge our profound flaws and errors and mess ups, it can help us feel more connected to the relationship that's central. Matt Motion, you're more educated on this, but he asks you, Mati, about a great article you wrote on Le Carré. Is that how you say it? Le Carré? I never really knew. Was this an inspiration for you, or?
I'm a big fan of John Le Carré, Zichrono Livracha. He passed away a couple months ago, and I wrote a story. Thank you, Matt, for reading the article. It was in the Globe and Mail, and it was a tribute to a guy who's been a real inspiration. He's a great espionage writer. And the Aleppo Codex story, although I didn't intend it at the beginning, ended up kind of having that element. It has elements of espionage. One of the players in the story is an Israeli agent in Turkey who kind of changes the course of the Aleppo Codex from where it was supposed to go to a different address. So I had Le Carré in my head. I can't, katonti, as they say in Hebrew. I'm not worthy to to inhabit the same sentence as Le Carré, but definitely he was an inspiration, and I hope everyone's read his great early books. His later books, less urgent, but he wrote a few great novels that everyone should read.
Okay, I want to, I think, make a shift, transition towards sort of today's world, but in the process, I want to just connect two of the comments. One is Dan Watman. You asked this question, does it the disappearance of the book coincide with the creation of the state? And yes, Dan, very much so, which is the tragedy that Mati writes about. It was this codex was written, scribed by Ben Asher in about the year 930, and it survived until well, we know for sure between 1947, when there was this, apparently fake news didn't just come about in the last week, month, year, couple years, decade. Fake news. There was a fire that everyone believed destroyed the Codex, the crown, but the fire didn't really destroy the crown. And Mati in his work uncovers that somehow between 47 and really, you've narrowed it to, what is it? December of 57 to the spring of 58, it's disappeared, it's gone. So Dan, the tragedy is for about 1,000 years, it's intact, and then it comes into the hands of the Jewish state, the Jewish people, of course, and no one would ever be more responsible, take greater care, ensure its well-being than us, but it didn't happen that way. So, right, which in a way brings us to today, and to ask you, Mati, before I ask this question about the elections and conversion, I do want to make one other comment about from Linda, your point about how you described Mati's writing, which I really appreciate it. You have a lyrical. I'm looking for your words, Linda. Where is it? I think I can find it. It's right in front of my eyes, I think. Oh, what? I don't know. It'll come to me. I love the way here you are, Linda. Your language is lyrical and expressive, and the book reads like a literary masterpiece. So I want to, I don't know. You want to say something, Mati, about this compliment or about the style of writing?
Thank you. Thank you. That's very, very kind.
Okay, well, it feels true. So, Cantor, are there other important ancient books and manuscripts from other Mizrahi communities that have gone missing? There might be a source material for new investigations. For Mati.
By Mati Friedman.
There are, and there has been some more investigation into the vanishing Yemeni manuscripts. The whole field of sketchy manuscript stories. Really, it's a kind of a gold mine for journalists. I don't know if you caught the story in the Times this week about the Shapira forgery. There was a great feature in the Times about an ancient copy of the Book of Deuteronomy that pops up, disappears. It's supposed to be a forgery, might be real. I highly recommend it. So that whole I guess genre is a great one. I really kind of maxed out on it when I wrote the Aleppo Codex. I spent a lot of time with the Aleppo Codex, years. And when the book came out, I felt like maybe that was enough, at least for now. So it's possible that the appetite will come back at some point, but I kind of moved to different kinds of stories, and I do enjoy them, but this one really wore me out. You might be able to tell by reading the book that a lot of work went into it and a lot of kind of anguish. And by the time I was done, I was done.
Dayenu for now on ancient scrolls. But David Stoughton does ask the question whether Steven Spielberg has been in touch with you to make the movie.
Not yet. It's possible that he just hasn't been able to find my number. So, Rabbi Feldman, if you see him, give him my email. Tell him, I'll make time to have a conversation.
I think it's every bit as good as Indiana Jones. Every bit as good. And you should have we should have brought our Indiana Jones hats. Indiana Davis. Anyway, okay, Mati.
Indiana Jones.
Mati, thoughts about what's going on in Israel today?
Everything is great. I wouldn't change a thing. And I'm just kidding. When I look at Israel, I kind of divide it into two areas. One is Israeli society, and one is Israeli politics. And when you're outside of Israel, you end up really consuming politics. You hear about what the leaders are saying, the dysfunction in our political system, which is very real. And you don't really hear much about Israeli society, which is, in my opinion, incredibly vibrant and remarkably cohesive and crazy and fractious. But I'm here for the society, not for the politics. And actually, as a reporter, I tend to write more about the place and the people and less about the political system, which in my opinion is really the least interesting thing here. Although I do acknowledge that it's important and you have to kind of keep track of it. So we have, assuming that we're interested in the politics, we have an election coming up, another election. It's the fourth one in less than 2 years. And it's a sign of real kind of a real breakdown in our democratic system. We just can't seem to form a stable government. And Israelis, even though they don't disagree that much about the big issues these days, we used to rip ourselves apart about the peace process and being on the right or being on the left. And it's not the case anymore, but the political system is just it's so divided that no one can form a stable government and govern even at a time of acute crisis like this one, where we need stability and we need a government that functions to deal with this this pandemic. And unfortunately, the politicians just can't get it together. So we're going into another round, and we'll see what happens. It looks very close. The question for Israelis is, will Netanyahu, he's a cat with at least 9 lives, will he be able to pull it out of the bag again? Or will some kind of coalition of Netanyahu opponents be able to knock him out and at least move us past the Netanyahu era, which my personal opinion is we need to move out of there, as fast as possible, just to, to make some progress on the things that we have to start thinking about. So I'm rooting for a change. It's not exactly the kind of change that I would design if I was, being asked to put together the ideal Israeli government, but we'll see. It looks like it's going to be a matter of individual seats in the Knesset, right? It's hovering around 60 out of 120. So if one of the smaller parties doesn't cross the electoral threshold, that could throw the whole election in a different direction. Someone once said that American politics is like checkers and Israeli politics is like 3-dimensional chess. So it's not Republicans against Democrats, it's a dozen parties, and the polling is incredibly complicated. You can't predict anything because there's too many moving parts. So I have no idea what is going to happen. We're just going to have to wait till next week and hope for the best.
And in terms of the late very recent Supreme Court decision on reform and conservative conversions, do you think this is an issue that is will it make much of a difference? How will it affect non-Orthodox rabbis in Israel? How will it affect non-Orthodox Jews or more Chiloni Jews?
Right. So like many people here, I was happy to see that decision. I guess for people who aren't following it too closely, the Supreme Court, after waiting for the political system to sort out the problem of non-Orthodox conversions in Israel, ruled that the state now has to recognize non-Orthodox conversions performed in Israel. By the way, non-Orthodox conversions performed outside of Israel are already recognized. So if you underwent conservative conversion in Wisconsin, you can come to Israel under the law of return, but you could not be converted by a conservative rabbi in Israel. It's kind of a glitch in the system. The court has now ruled that the glitch is over, and that sits on the big religious conundrum that we have here, which is that at the beginning of the state, important aspects of the lives of Israelis were entrusted to ultra-Orthodox rabbis as part of a political, kind of a horse trading session that allowed, the first governments to function. Ben-Gurion's assumption at the time was that ultra-Orthodox Judaism was a thing of the past, and that within a few years there would be no ultra-Orthodox Jews. That hasn't quite panned out. The population has grown. That's what happens when you have 10 kids a family. Non-Orthodox, the great liberal Jewish world of North America has largely remained in North America. So we don't have a huge demographic here fighting for non-Orthodox Judaism. There's a big secular demographic here, but that's not the same thing. And that is something that it's a lack that I feel. I wish we had 1 million, conservative or reform Jews here fighting for that kind of Judaism as Israelis. As it is, the custodians of those of liberal Judaism here end up being either Jews outside of Israel who lobby from the outside, or the courts. It's not the same as having a big domestic constituency for liberal Judaism. And even I go to an egalitarian Orthodox minyan here in Jerusalem. There is a liberal Jewish life here. It's not all black and white, but certainly the political power lies with the ultra-Orthodox, who are by no means a majority of people in the country. They have about a dozen seats in Knesset, but those seats are always the swing votes for any coalition. You can't form a coalition without buying off the ultra-Orthodox parties, and they have a price that you have to pay. And one of the prices is a draft deferment for ultra-Orthodox men. Another one of the prices is that you can't change the religious status quo that's been in place since the beginning of the state. And it's not ideal, to put it quite lightly. When you're living in Israel, Jewish life is much more than the rabbinate. It's much more than the state. We don't really have anything to do with the rabbinate. People generally avoid the rabbinate at all costs, but there's things that you can't avoid, and the amount of power that is wielded by very extreme forms of Judaism here is a major flaw in the Jewish state, unfortunately.
Sandy, you've asked a question: would non-Orthodox rabbis be able to perform weddings? This decision by the Supreme Court doesn't affect that. What it means is that non-Orthodox rabbis are able to perform conversions in Israel that are recognized under the law of return, which is very different from the rabbinic law. So it doesn't change anything around weddings. Lots of non-Orthodox weddings happen, but not because the bride and groom care about it being recognized by the state. They want a ritual. One maybe final question. Just I don't know if it's a question. Yair Lapid made this comment. It was reported. Like that. What a tragedy that Israel is the only country, Western country in the world, that does not allow the freedom of religion for Jews. Am I quoting him fairly closely, Mati, accurately?
I didn't hear him say that, but it sounds like him. It's certainly an incredible irony, and it just shows what happens when the country is kind of a series of compromises that were made along the way, because it's always an emergency here. There's always something more important than that issue. And we kind of have this patchwork of compromises that has resulted in a country that's pretty great in many ways. In many ways, it's much more liberal than the United States. If you look at issues like, healthcare, we all have healthcare, gun control, gay rights, abortion. I mean, this is a much more liberal place than the United States. And you have these warped characteristics of the Jewish state where a Reform rabbi can perform a wedding, but the wedding isn't recognized by the rabbinate, which is controlled by the ultra-Orthodox. So you have to, if you have a Reform wedding, you'd have to get married outside of Israel, and then, just to get that certificate and then come back, which is ludicrous. And the same goes for burial. And it's just, it's a huge mistake. It's a huge mistake, but it results from the compromises that were made between a leadership that was never interested in religion, right? Ben-Gurion was not a Reform Jew. He wasn't a conservative Jew. He thought religion was a thing of the past. It didn't really interest him. So he was happy to subcontract it out to the ultra-Orthodox, who really, really cared, who seemed kind of like a harmless minority at the time. Fast forward 70 years later, the ultra-Orthodox are immensely powerful here, even though they're still a minority. And they have a stranglehold over issues of ritual that would be unacceptable, as Yair Lapid pointed out, in basically any other country. I think he's right.
I want to, before I close, I just want to ask your neighbor, Mati, that being my wonderful wife, Tara. Tara, you haven't said anything, so I miss your voice. So you can say something to me or to Mati or to your wonderful Beth-El family.
I think Tara's right around the corner, right? So I could actually shout out the window.
Exactly. Just what amazing morning, Mati. What an incredible gift! Like the intellect and the adventure of the story, and the participation. This whole experience was just wonderfully uplifting. So thank you to everybody.
And God willing, the two of you will and your wife, Monty, and our children will meet each other very soon. Last thing I'm going to say before we close is, so we've spent this morning on the Aleppo Codex, and Monty did not ask me to do this, so know that. But it strikes me, Monty, as you were speaking about, your hashkafa, your the way you go about writing. Israel is about so much more than the politics of the state. It's about the human beings and the feeling of the culture on the streets and the very particular differences between all the Mizrahi communities and Ashkenazi communities. And these two books, the two books that have followed the Aleppo Codex, Spies of No Country, and then Pumpkin Flowers, they're really a beautiful example of your master, your gift, Mati, of looking at the lives of some I would say simple, not because they're necessarily simple, but human beings, all of us are simple, just real human beings, and unpacking their lives and weaving them together and seeing them as individuals, but also seeing how they are a critically important piece of something much larger. And these two books have a very strong focus on the Mizrahi Sephardi world, which in the last decade or so is really beginning to assert itself in ways that, for all of us Ashkenazi, the sort of founders of or modern Zionism, didn't expect that, didn't realize that that was on its way to being the defining cultural, the ta'am, the character of the state of Israel. The Hebrew of Israel is Mizrahi Hebrew, not an Ashkenazi Hebrew. You know, that's why it's ta ta ta, not sa sa sa. Anyway, okay, we're going to conclude. Cantor, Adam, thank you so very much for beautiful service. Mati, what a blessing and a gift. We're grateful to you. Mazel tov to all of us for having made it this far after a year of COVID. And may we continue to learn and grow and celebrate together. Wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. Take care. Bye-bye. A Shavua Tov to Mati and Tara.